Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain wa ba'd. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Today alhamdulillah we have our new sessions. It is session 6. So we are going to discuss on Islamic theory in consumptions. This is the learning outcomes that we can learn today. So the students are able to explain how to gain the optimizations given the maslahah functions. Secondly, going to be the distinguish some mainstream literature sharing similarities with Islamic attitude toward consumptions and optimizations. This is the outline today. We start from introductions, theory of consumer behavior, Islamic consumer behavior, and come into theory of maslahah. Lastly, going to be on the analysis and conclusions. So this is the questions from the boys. See here in the first pictures, we have Ferrari, we have Alphard, and we have last going to be Avanza. So we don't know which one actually going to be you choose, but in the class, inshallah, we are going to have a little bit survey on it. So come into the girls. The first is diamond, second is gold bar, and last is going to be pearls. It's going to be like what is exactly going to be your choice on this kind of alternative. So starting with the economic activities. When we see the economic activities deal with 3 points here. The economic activities starting the productions, consumptions, and distributions. So the productions come into how actually they utilize and having the produce and have acquisitions into the matters, the things, and come into productions. How do they actually consume acquisitions on the thing, and they spend and they have consumed on this point. And lastly, going to be the distributions. But now coming to the questions, which one is Islamic economics emphasized as the beginning activities? So according to our scholars of the Islamic economic scholars, so starting in the beginning come from the distributions. So the reason is actually they emphasize on the self-interest must be what is a control by how do we distribute our wealth, how we distribute our income. So distributions starting at the beginning as it is kind of zakat, pillar of Islam in the beginning. So let's come into some introductions here. The economic deals with the human behavior in the matters related to the acquisitions of resources to fulfill human wants for existence. So at the point here in the human behavior, how do they actually have the activity of acquisitions of resource for their want? So Islamic economists believe that traditional behavior assumptions have prevented economies from coming to grips with some very fundamental issues, and that modifications of those assumptions is essential to further progress in social science. So according to the conventional point of view, let's see here, customer behavior in conventional economics is driven by rationalism, utilitarianism, and also self-interest. One could, somebody could will consume if his budget to consume is available, and it could maximize his utility. One of the very rational thing is how much money that you are having, and the budget to consume is available, and also in order to maximize the utility that you actually desire to. So let's come into the fundamental neoclassical behavior assumptions. Starting with the economy world is reasonably viewed as being in equilibrium. So the first point of neoclassical behavior is, according to them, it is equilibrium. So in the economic world, it is reasonably viewed as the being in equilibrium. Secondly, individual economic actors repeatedly face the same choice situations or sequence of very similar choices. So because of people having the similarity of same choice situations, that's called come into the first the assumptions of the neoclassical behavior. So the actors, the third, have stable preference and thus evaluate the outcomes of individual choice according to the stable criteria. So when they want to have this kind of preference in their choice, so they have stable preference and come into stable criteria. Coming to still in fundamental neoclassical behavior, so given repeatedly exposures, and individual actors could identify and would seize any available opportunity for improving outcomes. Yes, because the opportunity there, so for also the outcomes there in order to be improved. And in the case of business firms, would do so on the pain of being eliminated by competitions. So hence no equilibrium can arise in which the individual actors fail to maximize their preference. Lastly, because the world is in approximate equilibrium, it exhibits at least approximately the patterns employed by the assumptions that the actors are maximizing. The details of the additive process are complex and probably actors and situations specific. By contrast, the regulatories associated with optimization's equilibrium are comparatively simple. So considerations of parsimony therefore dictate that the way to progress in economic understanding is to explore these regulatories theoretically and to compare the result with other observations. So coming to the theory of customer behavior, there are three theories here, starting with the marginal utility, law of diminishing marginal utility. Secondly, come into the characteristic approach. Lastly, going to be indifferent curve. So the theory based on the economic rationalism and utilitarianism. Let's come to the discussions one by one. So starting with the marginal utility. Marginal utility is the concept of person's satisfaction level in the consumptions of a good or service. Marginal utility is highly dependent on consumer taste and satisfactions. Utility is assessed from the use value of an item used by a customer. So use value can be distinguished between two definitions. The first starting from the marginal utility, or we say marginal satisfactions, namely the increase or the decrease in satisfactions as a result of increasing or decreasing in the use of the certain unit of good. So total utility, it is the overall satisfactions obtained from consuming a certain number of a good or service. So in the beginning, we starting with the marginal utility, how actually they can obtain, or the person or the people, they can obtain their satisfactions through their some choices they can obtain from the consuming certain number of goods and services. So according to M. Abraham Garcia Torrens, the customer behavior theory, it is going to be utility maximizations and the sake of novelty divides the use value into two. Based on the two economic actions taken by customers, those two actions are interrelated. The first value come into decisions utility value. It is associated with the actions of purchasing. So in the act of buying, so customers buy several goods at the same time, and before making a purchase the customer must decide which goods will he buy. Next, experience utility. Starting next is going to be relating to the actions of consumptions with the capacity to fulfill the satisfactions of the good. So in the beginning, they have to decide which one going to be purchased. Secondly, come into their experience. So which one going to be fulfill the satisfactions of the good. Come into the theory indifferent curves. So what is exactly indifferent curve? The indifferent curves approach emphasize the comparisons of satisfactions obtained by customers with various consumption choices without needing to know how much satisfactions itself is. So there are some choices of consumptions, but they do not really emphasize on how much actually satisfactions itself. So coming to the first assumptions, if the consumptions of ABC goods is more satisfying than XYZ good, then the satisfactions value of ABC good greater than XYZ good, and consumers will choose ABC good. In these conditions, customers strongly prefer ABC goods over XYZ good. Assumptions 2. If the satisfactions value of ABC good is equivalent to XYZ, then the customers will be in the independent positions, assuming that the satisfactions obtained from two goods is the same. So the result is not problematic which will consume which. So assumption 3, when consumers prefers at the same time feel the same when consuming good ABC and XYZ, then the positions of ABC goods is greater than goods XYZ. So here the consumptions is in the positions of softly prefer ABC good rather than XYZ good. Let's come into the curve itself. So in different curves, it assumes that all good are perfect substitutions to one another as long as they satisfy the customer's utility. So it is built on maximizations of utility. Maximization of utility is only constrained by budget line. So exhaustions of budget is better than non-exhaustion. So two options here in different curves, meet budget line or budget line meet in different curves. Come to the matters here. So when we see the graph here, so it's going to be like this is what do we have in different curves. How the budget line come into which one going to be the preference that can be the customer obtain to. So the budget line, it must be come into the customer preference, and thus to also come into shifting into this kind of point. This is what we call by the customer preference and the budget line into indifferent curve. So this is treadmill consumption's behavior. What's mean here? The more households income, the more they consume on the commodities. Those actually come from the conventional. So when you have the more income, so the more you consume on the commodities. So this is the critic on what exactly come into the consumption's behavior toward on the modern people today. So Islamic principle on consumptions come into the Islamic point of view. Consumptions is aimed at fulfilling worldly and hereafter need. So basically, when Muslim they consume in some commodities or services, so it's aimed into two things. Starting from the worldly affairs or worldly matters, and secondly come into hereafter need. Not merely come into your material aspect, but come into your spiritual aspect. Secondly, going to be wealth should be used in accordance with Islamic teaching, Sharia. So when we have our wealth, our property, it must become into the accordance of Sharia, going to be Sharia compliance. So successfulness is measured by Islamic guidance, not simply by the amount of possessions. So it is not how much money that you earn, how much wealth that you have or possess, but the way how it actually the successfulness come into here and hereafter. Come into masalah is the measurements, not utility. So not into utility about your satisfactions, but come into the masalah, not merely into individual, but also come into the society and public. So consumptions in Islam, so in the difference between wants and need, exactly we have discussed in earlier discussions, what exactly different wants and need. So the theory of maslah, realizing the public benefit and keep away the harm. This is going to be like jalbul masalih wa daf'ul mafasid. There are three, what do you say, aspect here. And the beginning, we have to come into masalah daruriyah. It is going to be like realization of the essential, realizing of the essential. Secondly, come into complementary, masalah hajiyah, and lastly, going to masalah tahsiniyah is going to be embellishment. It's going to be like come into the tahsiniyah. The an Islamic in Islamically customer behavior is aimed to fulfill the masalah respectively. So masalah is the one going to be achieved in the consumptions in Islam. So come into maqasid Sharia. Why it come into maqasid Sharia? So according to Imam Al-Ghazali, this quoted by Imam Shatibi mentioned five objective of the Sharia. They are to serve the first ad-din, the preservations of din, the religions and faith. Come secondly, going to be nafas, life, soul and body. It's going to be hifdul nafas, hifdul din, hifdul nafas. The third, hifdul akal, intellectually, educations and knowledge. And afterward come into the nasal, posterity, and come into the mal is going to be preservations into wealth and property. So because we talk about the consumptions here, so it must be the consumptions come into Maqasid Sharia with the five elements here come together. So theory of maslaha. Maslaha is the property or power of a good or service that prompt the objective of Sharia in terms of preservations of life, faith, life, intellectual, posterity, and property are going to be the wealth. So the goods and service that barely protect those five basic elements are categorized as the essential. So it's going to be the essential or daruriya. Uh, So the good and service that complement the essential in the preservations of the objective of Sharia are called by the needs or hajiyah. It is going to be in complementary. And lastly, the good and service that ameliorate and beautify the five basic elements of existence called by the luxuries are going to be tahsiniyat. So let's come into the comparisons with masalah and utility. So starting with masalah, it is based on the need. So we have the objective, it's going to be positive, it is going to be limited, measurable, and individually and socially consistent. But coming to utility, based on one, it is not based on the need. And it is subjective because it is come into the satisfactions. Ambivalent, which is having mixed feeling or contradictory ideas about something. It is ambivalent. So we have an unlimited, because you talk about the ones, and five, not sure, measurable, and lastly, individually and socially inconsistent. So consumption preference in Islam, when we see in the first curve here, so where F is going to be fala, CI is going to be consumptions for ibadah, and CY is consumption for the worldly use. So when you have your income and you put greater your income, so the consumption for ibadah are going to be lifting. So your fala and your ibadah, it must be into the way here in line. But when you talk about CV consumption from the worldly causes, so it's going to be declining. Then the point that exactly what do we different or what we do differ from another theory of economy. So faith and budget land. When we talk here in the first discussion, C1 is consumption for ibadah and CW is consumption for the worldly cost. In the first graph here, so when you have your consumptions into worldly lesser, so it's going to be your faith going to be plus and plus. It's going to be increasing. But again, when you are consuming too much on the worldly cost, your faith is going to be decreasing and decreasing. This what will be happen in the way you want to achieve your satisfactions. So this is maslah in different curve. It's going to be like consumption for ibadah in terms of the worldly cost. So the three here are actually which one you can meet for the maslah itself. So the higher the maslaha is going to be, you have to meet into the ibadah. Consumption for ibadah itself going to be shrinking and much steeper than before. As last curve we have is going to be like the maslaha are going to be higher than others. So axioms of Islamic behavior, customer behavior. So individuals maximize social welfare. So we talk about the social welfare as defined and determined by Islamic law or Sharia. Individuals tend to maximize their own or their household welfare in conformity with the maximizations of maslahah. Individuals tend to maximize their own utility given the legal and social constraint of Islamic law. Again, it must be strict into Islamic law. So what are some assumptions in Islamic customer behavior? So a customer in Islamic economic framework is homo Islamicus as opposed to homo economicus. So it is like rajulun saleh, homo Islamicus. Muslim customers consumption set is different from usual consumption since it is restricted to only permissible commodities. It is come into Sharia. So the Muslim customer will not be totally insatiable or never satisfied with respect to every commodity. Maslaha of the customer depends on the social maslaha. So for the example, welfare of others in the society, so that this behavior is not selfish. Still on the assumptions, the Muslim customers' total spending is classified into two majorities category. The first to achieve satisfactions in this world, which include present and future consumptions, and spending for other with a view to maximize his spiritual satisfactions to earn reward in the hereafter. So the allocations of worldly spending is left to the rational consumption customer as religious aspect come along with it. So we cannot left the religious aspect when we also come into the consumption. So the Muslim consumption basket is divided into three distinct subset with respect to natures of commodities. These are essential, needs, and luxuries. It is going to be like doruriyah, hajiyat, and tahsiniyat. So this is the analysis of choice set by customers. When we have this kind of what do you say model, so exactly that we want to emphasize on this thing. For the example, so the proportion of income for going to be allocated from the worldly spending, so going to be like spiritual consumption. So exactly equal to the spiritual consumptions. So laying between 0 and 1 is the proportions of the spending of the worldly consumptions, so which the customers wish to spend in the current time period is saved. So where 1, 2, 3 is going to be like is the proportions of the current period consumptions on essential needs and luxuries. So starting with the first going to be in basic need, you have the fulfill come into the consumption of essential needs and luxuries. So going to be in the end C1 going to be in the commodities for the example essential needs and luxuries. So it's going to be balanced. So in here and hereafter going to be in balance, the orientations come into social welfare and also come into the hereafter for the future's need. This is the reference that we can see, and inshallah we are going to have the Q&A in the class. See you when I see you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.